When Josie comes home. Josie took one last look in the mirror and smiled at her reflection. It wasn't every day that she felt pretty. But today she did. The flowing dress that clung to her figure was much more than just a dress. She'd inherited it from a long-distance relative. After having it altered just right, it was finally complete. It was everything she dreamed it would be. She hurried into the studio where her husband Craig was painting his latest mural. She hated to bother him as he worked, knowing how sensitive his creative flow could be. But the dress couldn't wait any longer. She needed him to see it. With her head held high, she snuck up behind Craig and tangled her arms around him from behind. He shook her off, grunting with annoyance from her bombarding his painting. "Look," she cheered before he could chastise her. Josie opened up the jacket and gave him a twirl. The dress spun along with her. Josie knew he would have to remember the dress from all those months ago when she received it. The alterations were delayed, and she'd repeatedly vented to him about how impatient she was feeling. However, it was worth the wait. Craig would see it too. Josie watched her husband's face. She anticipated something positive from him, a compliment, acknowledgement of the dress, anything. But Craig's face sat blank, as if he was staring at nothing. "I'm hungry," he finally spoke. It took Josie a moment to process what he said. "What?" her voice cracked. Craig scoffed and dipped his brush into a puddle of paint on his palette. He returned to his wall, painting away, as she'd never attempted to speak to him. As if she hadn't spoke to him. Josie was too hurt to try again. Perhaps she'd expected too much from him. The dress wasn't nearly as sentimental to him as it was to her, but still, she'd felt quite confident and clearly presented it as a surprise. But that look he had ingrained itself into her mind, the look he gave her. He glared at her with so little emotion. The same way he'd look at a credit card bill or a traffic light, blank and inconvenienced. Was that all she was to him? Later that evening, as she prepared for bed, Craig sat at his desk in the corner of the bedroom. His sketchbook was propped open to the side, and in front of him sat a plate of food Josie had prepared for him. He'd also helped himself to a glass of dinner wine. Craig hadn't spoken to her since the incident with the dress, and she was desperate for his connection. The dress was hanging in the closet, but instead of bringing her joy, it delivered the pain of rejection. Josie bunched it up and shoved it in the bottom drawer of her dresser. One day, she would find the courage to try it again. One day, she would find the courage to try it on again. In his peripheral vision, Craig saw his wife slipping off her usual satin nightgown. It landed on the floor with a rustle. Josie watched her husband as she silently crawled into the bed, her nude body gliding across the sheets. She covered herself over just enough to keep something to the imagination. Her eyes fell closed, and her mind wandered. What would it be like to wake up to his embrace? Maybe the wine would loosen him up, allow him to indulge a little more with her than usual. She let the sheets slip lower. Josie dipped into sleep for a few minutes, only to be awoken by Craig standing up from his desk and sliding his jacket on. She watched in shock as he glanced at her, seemingly in disgust, and then he walked out of the room. "Don't go, please." Her voice came out as a whimper, but the only sound that carried through the home was that of his boots walking out of the front door and leaving her. He left behind a few bites of chicken on his plate, an empty wine glass, and a broken wife. She couldn't help but shake her head and mumble profanity under her lips. How could the man she loved be so cold? So blatant in his disinterest for her. She'd always been, and always felt, like a needy woman, as if her requests were too far-fetched or bothersome. But she was sick of watering herself down. Love within a marriage didn't seem like too much to ask for. Outside of the bedroom, a dark figure peered inside. The lack of curtains showed Josie on full display as she sulked in her cold sheets alone. It was a perfect opportunity, and she was hurt and vulnerable. The intruder carefully swept off his shoes and clothes and dropped him outside beneath the window. He knew Josie liked to change clothes in front of that window and leave it open, slightly ajar in the middle of the night for gusts of cool air. Such an easy target she was. The intruder pushed open the glass from the outside and slithered through the opening like a snake. Josie was too deep in his rumination to hear anything. With her eyes closed, she tossed and turned and wished that things could be different between her and Craig. And then a cold fingertip traced the outline of her shoulder from behind. Craig? She smiled to herself as she attempted to roll over and greet him with a kiss. Maybe he'd had a change of heart and realised how horrible he was acting. Or maybe it was just the wine and her nakedness that seduced him. Either way, it was something. Shh! Shh! The intruder huffed, and warm breath tickled Josie's back. His hand pressed into her waist to keep her from flipping over to see him. It didn't sound like her husband. The breathing was stronger and huskier than his. It didn't feel like him either. Who was this in bed with her? Pushing himself against her with a firm grip. Was she so desperate? As she pushed back, leaning into the touch of a stranger in her bed. Josie let her eyes fall closed once more and accepted the embrace of the intruder. It couldn't be so wrong just to let a stranger cuddle her just for a night.